Hello, my name is Merlin Thompson, and I want to welcome you today to my presentation as part of the 2020 Australian Suzuki National Teachers Conference. For me, it's an honor to be included in this event because I recognize how conferences like this contribute to the growth and well-being of Suzuki teachers. This is a place of renewal, a place of inspiration and sharing, a place where we come together for conversations that inform and challenge each of us on our own teaching journey. So, thank you for joining in. The title for my presentation is Versatile Suzuki Teachers. And I have to admit, versatility is a topic that's been a primary focus of mine for about 5 years. In my attempts to understand more about the specific actions that teachers take in facilitating successful teaching. My goal in this session? Spark your thought processes. Influence the way you think and engage as a teacher. I'm hoping you'll get glimpses of yourself. Glimpses of things you do, things you may avoid doing, things you may want to do. You've just been waiting for someone to invite you into the process. So what I'm hoping to do is to invite you to being more of the teacher you already are. I've got a bit of an agenda. It circles around the following topics. What do we do as versatile teachers? Who do we do it for? What about obstacles? How can we tell them if we're on track? Why versatility? But I'll also add that I'm not just going to stick to the agenda. I may veer off track every once in a while. Now, if I was in Sydney right now and you were in the audience, I'd be asking someone for some definitions. And the first thing I want to define is, what is versatility? Versatility is the ability to adapt to different functions, contexts, and activities. And I know someone in the audience would have come up with that answer. It's a typical definition. And for us as Suzuki teachers, versatility may come to mind immediately in terms of thinking about group lessons and individual lessons. We teach beginner students and advanced students. We may teach classical music and jazz on the one hand. This talk, however, though, I'm going to take a look at versatility from what I call an action perspective. Because I want to take a look at what do the actions of a versatile Suzuki teacher look like. The next thing that I'd be asking all of you as Suzuki teachers is to just tell me about what is it that makes a Suzuki teacher. And I know that it wouldn't take us very long before people would have come up with the following things. Because Suzuki teachers are really fall under a particular branch, I'll call it maybe. And the three branches that I'm thinking of are guiding principle. We have a guiding principle, we have a guiding methodology, and we have a guiding philosophy. Our guiding principle is that all people can learn. And if we want to go back to Dr. Suzuki, well, he used the language of all children can learn. And we can pretty much understand why he talked about things like that during the 1930s, because there were lots of people who thought that all children could not learn. Today we know that's not the case, and our focus really is on knowing that all people can learn. It's our guiding principle. As a guiding methodology, we have the mother tongue approach. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we pay attention to the way that we learn our mother language. Mother language involves stages of babbling, stages of learning to speak, stages of learning to read. And in terms of what we do as musicians, the mother tongue approach gives us, starting with tonalization, moving on to learning by ear, learning to play by ear, and finally, learning to play by reading. The Suzuki method has also, though, a guiding philosophy. And Dr. Suzuki used the language of noble human beings to talk about character development. What I find really interesting about character development and the idea of noble human beings is that Noble Human Beings really points us in the direction of talking about a number of characteristics: humility, integrity, generosity, wisdom, authenticity. And noble human being also involves the idea of the individual as a person, the individual as part of a home, as part of a community, and the individual as part of a living planet. I also like to add on one more thing to make this understanding of noble human beings a little bit clearer. And I pay it in particular to the concept of wisdom. And in this case, I go to a Canadian source, a Canadian Indigenous source actually, who define wisdom as the ability to recognize what needs to be done and do it without being asked or told what to do. And so here we start to see already there's a connection between versatility and Suzuki teachers in the sense that versatility asks us to adapt to different functions. In the sense that Suzuki teachers, we're asked to adapt in terms of recognizing what needs to be done and doing it without being asked or told what to do. The next place that I want to visit is this, what I call music teacher timeline. Just to take a look briefly, before we get going with what does versatility all about, to look at what leads us to this place that we are today. What are the various historical movements that have contributed to the way music teachers teach in 2020? The first place that I go back to is prior to the 1800s, when we look at the master teacher and the teacher, the master apprentice environment. And although we use the terms master apprentice quite readily today, a master apprenticeship relationship prior to the 1800s was quite different from what we've got going on today. In a master teacher apprenticeship environment, music students studied music within a household, much the same way that a furniture maker or an artist or a farmer lived within a community that supported that very domain all by itself. So starting with that, prior to the 1800s, if we think of the Bach family, the Mozart family, two really easy examples of how that musical growth occurred within a very specific musical environment. With the 1800s, though, we see the introduction of what I call the virtuoso teacher. And this was really a response to a number of things. We have the industrialization of education during the 1800s, the introduction of public schools. For music, things that are important were things like the invention of the mechanized printing press, which meant that music in its printed form could be readily available to anyone. This virtuoso teacher environment was really focused on the end product. And in that sense, they treated this end product of the virtuoso in terms of more or less, I would say, a factory approach. It meant that there was a system of standardization of repertoire, a linear approach to moving through the repertoire, and so on. Towards the end of the 1800s, though, in the early 1900s, people like John Dewey and Maria Montessori showed up and really took the virtuoso teacher approach to task. And they, by turning things around to look at what does a student-centered approach to teaching look like. So they were focused on the students. What do students need from teachers? Which is quite different from what the virtuoso teacher was looking like. Emil Dalcroze, Zoltan Kodály, Carl Orff, and Dr. Suzuki, I call them the rebel music teachers because they really did take this idea of what does student-centered teaching look like. And they addressed it very clearly with each one of their approaches. The interesting thing is, though, during the 1900s, during the 20th century, although we have these rebel teachers there, the primary influence on teaching was behaviorist psychology, in particular as defined by Edward Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. And here we find an approach that's really focused on teachers directing students, teachers really paying close attention. On occasion, I do call it controlling what the student was doing. And that's really was the dominant force during the 20th century, during the 1900s. Here in the 2000s, we've seen another shift in what teachers do. And there's been a recent focus on what I call brain-centered teaching. You'll be familiar with it through the works of Daniel Coyle, The Talent Code, Malcolm Gladwell, The Outliers, Benedict Carey, and Richard Bjork as well. And although none of those characters, none of those authors originated the research that they used to talk about brain-centered teaching, their approach is what does knowing about the brain and how the brain operates, what do those things tell us about how we might teach? So that's our historical background. And what I'll say about it, just to kind of summarize, is that each one of these aspects, master, virtuoso, student-centered, behaviorist, and brain-centered, show up in our teaching today. But I don't think they fully tell the whole story. And in particular, I don't think they tell the story of what versatile teachers do in the actions that they take in teaching. So what exactly are versatile teachers doing? Well, the number one thing on my list of what versatile Suzuki teachers do is they lead the way. And they lead the way because they've figured out a lot of things. They've figured out tone and technique. They've figured out what it means to learn to play by ear and what it means to play by reading. And my impression is that leading the way is the mainstay of us for a good reason. And it's because students depend on Suzuki teachers to carve out a secure path that gets them where they want to go without hitting dead ends or getting off track. And that means that as teachers, we figure out the long-term and short-term routes that'll streamline students' development. Leading the way describes a lot of what we do, but when it comes to versatile teaching, there's lots more to it. So the next thing on my list in terms of what do versatile Suzuki teachers do is they follow their students' lead. And I include this because, it's so easy for us as teachers, knowing what we do and being able to provide leadership and lead the way, that it's kind of easy for us to just take over the journey. I like to include follow students' lead as a reminder that it's not my journey. This is my students' journey. And although I know a lot about many of the places that would be great to visit on this journey, I really want to pay attention and make sure that I got my student participating and that I pay attention to that it's their journey, not mine. So even from that very first lesson, when they come and I see, this is all going to good, but I better slow my pace down, follow their lead, to my most advanced students who arrive for a lesson on a given day, and yet something tells me this is the day I need to follow their lead. The next actions that I want to talk about are advocate and challenge. And these two actions for me, it's interesting because, again, we had the lead and follow, going one direction, going the other. Advocate and follow, once again, we have this idea of going multiple directions. For me, when I advocate on my students' behalf, I stand up for who they are. I stand up for my student, Jesse, knowing that he's a very active child, and I've got to find ways for him to maintain his energeticness during his lessons. At the same time, I'm also the person that's going to bring challenges into the lesson. And for me, challenges are really interesting because There are such things as good challenges and bad challenges. Good challenges for me are just the right size. They're not so big that students will be overwhelmed by the challenge, and they're not so small that students will find them insignificant and a waste of time. So my responsibility to them is to continually come up with challenges that meet their needs. Next on my list, I've got handover tools. And what this is all about is about student ownership. So how do we teach in a way that students get ownership of the process? And I'm thinking of just simple things like teaching them how to keep the beat, teaching them how to be consistent with tone production. So we hand over the tools knowing that our job is to prepare them to be independent. No, I won't say to prepare them. Our job is to help them in terms of their independence and in terms of their autonomy. Next on my list of what versatile actions Suzuki teachers have is the idea that we are great resources. We're a great musical resource. We're a great learning resource and a great personal resource as well. And students will be tapping into our resources all the way through their development. I follow that one up, though, with the action of getting out of the way. And I do this because, I'm a teacher with a lot of experience. And what I know about myself is that if plan A doesn't work, I've got plan B, plan C, and plan D all ready to go. But what I've discovered is that, it's all great to have plan A, B, C, and D, but sometimes I just really need to get out of the way. I just need to step to the side and trust that my student has the ability to maneuver their way through any number of situations. So indeed, I get out of the way. Versatile Suzuki teachers, who do we do it for? Well, I think the most obvious thing is that we do it for our students, but I also want to include parents and the community that we work within. Our primary focus is relationship building, or I'll say one of our primary focuses is relationship building. And with that in mind, I want to keep always three things in mind: understanding, acceptance, and caring. And I include these three things in terms of the relationships I build with my students, their parents, and my community of colleagues, and my community of students and parents as well. I include these three things because I want to pay attention to the various layers the relationships involve. And for me, there is an understanding layer to relationships. And that's just about the getting to know who people are. It gets more challenging, though, when it comes to accepting who people are. And this can kind of throw us for a bit of a tailspin. We might have a student, like my student Jessie, who's very energetic. Can I accept that Jessie is an energetic student? I think I can. And what can I do with that, knowing that he is an energetic student, is to build on it. And I build on this idea of understanding and accepting Jessie by caring for him for who he is. So who do we do it for? We do it for students, parents, and the community. And we do it by building relationships that are based on understanding, acceptance, and care. What's next on my list? Well, we have to talk about obstacles because for sure, versatile Suzuki teachers do encounter obstacles. And for me, what I put at the top of the list, actually, well, not the top, the only thing that I put on this list is fear. And I use two subcategories underneath that, the idea of fear of failure and the fear of success. And it might seem strange to talk about fear in terms of fear of failure and fear of success, but for me, they're really closely linked. Fear of failure. Why do we fear failure? I think it's because we're worried that we'll get stuck with failure. If we get to a place where students aren't playing well or doing things well, that we're going to be stuck there forever, that we won't be able to get out of failure. In contrast, the fear of success, that once we achieve success, are we really capable of producing that success again? Or is this just a one-time event that we might never be able to reproduce? What for me is important about fear is that fear is an indicator. It's like a message. I call it a message that we send from ourselves to ourselves that we need to pay attention to something. Whatever that something is, I'm sure we can figure it out. So I'm not really here to say, get rid of your fears, get rid of your fear of failure, get rid of your fear of success. I say keep them close at hand, because for me, fear is like a whistleblower. It's like this internal alarm that just tells us we need to pay attention to something. My solution in terms of obstacles is to actually get a grip on fear and to acknowledge that our teaching takes place in real life. And that means that sometimes we will encounter obstacles. Some obstacles may require a brief amount of thinking to get over. Other obstacles may require a great deal of thinking to get through. But with a grip on fear, my feeling is that yes, indeed, we can get through it. The next one. How can we tell if we're on track? How can versatile teachers tell if they're going in the right direction? And for me, this is all about reflection. And reflection, although people most often think of reflection as what we do after an event, I like to think of reflection in 4 ways. Reflection is what we do before. It's actually the planning that we do before we set off on our teaching. Reflection also occurs during. It's those spontaneous things, insights and awarenesses and understandings that come to light during our teaching. Reflection is what we can do after. And that's probably where we most typically think of reflection, is what we do after a given period of time to look back and to see what went on. But for me, there's also an additional place, and that is, what are we going to do next? What are you going to do now that you know what you know about what you've done? There are a couple of areas for me that are important about reflection. A practical area, which has to do with learning, and a personal area, which has to do with who we are. The practical area, I really like to come to understand what learning is all about. And for me, learning isn't a process that just goes neatly from step to step. Learning is a process that involves forgetting and confusion. There's revisiting. You may hit a plateau. There may be some refinement at a certain point before all of that, before you can apply what it is that you think you've learned. And so for me, within that cycle, there's a certain amount of growth and rest that are really important. In terms of the personal place, I'll go back to what I talked about relationships before, reflecting on the relationships that I have with my students, on how I do understand them or accept or care for them. Do I have empathy for them? What I like to do, and I'll just mention quickly here, is that I keep report cards. And those report cards are my way of twice a year doing a big reflection, looking back on where we've been and what we've done. I share the report cards with the parents of my students in parent-teacher meetings. And it's my way of keeping things on track, of making sure that reflection is part of the versatile teacher's approach. Why is versatility so important? Well, what draws me to versatility are really 3 things, and they come back from who we are as Suzuki teachers. Guiding principle, guiding methodology, guiding philosophy. Because those things, those three areas, really, for me, reinforce that we have a certain powerful belief in music. We have belief in education. We have a belief in humanity. And what it is for me with all of those is that we believe music can change people's lives. Education can change people's lives. And we as human beings can change our own lives, and we can change the lives of others around us. So what it is for me that's important about these beliefs is that my belief in music, my belief in education, and my belief in humanity inform the actions that I take as a teacher, more so than the teacher models that I shared with you at the beginning of this presentation. So why is versatility important? Because for me, that's how we live out our beliefs. So what we've come to then here is what I like to think of somewhat of a constellation of characteristics and ideas. Versatile teachers, we work under this umbrella, you might call it, or with the foundation of music, education, and humanity. And underneath that umbrella, we lead and follow, we advocate and challenge, we hand over tools, we are a resource, we get out of the way, we build relationships, we have a grip on fear. We haven't just thrown fear out the corner, out of the room, and we're reflective about what we do. Now, if I was in Australia with you right now, and we were all in the same room, I would be turning things over to you for a couple of moments. And what I'd like to do, and I know we can't do that, I can't actually turn things over and have you talk to the person next to you, but I've got an alternative. And for the next couple minutes, I'm going to ask you to have a look at the constellation of actions that I've got on this slide. I want to ask you to see what stands out about this collection of ideas. What feels familiar? What feels like something new? What comes to mind when you think of yourself as a versatile Suzuki teacher? And I'm going to give you a couple of moments to think about it. And I know it might be tempting to think, oh, I'm just going to fast forward through this section of this presentation and get to the next idea. But I think I want to ask you to just, take a moment, gather your thoughts, think about what you've just traveled through these ideas. And I'll be back in just a few minutes. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time to reflect briefly on what versatile teaching might be all about. What I've got for you next is a short video of one of my students. And I'll just preface it by saying, in addition to my own personal reflective activities, I've also been asking my students to share with me their reflections as well. And that's meant that for a number of years now, I've been asking students from about grade 5, which would be about the age of 10 and 11, up through my teen years. I've been giving them questions to think about and to respond to in a written form. Students in grade 5 or grade 6, I typically like to hear about what they think it's like first for a boy or girl their age to learn to play the piano, to learn to take music lessons. This last year, at the beginning of the year would be our school year of September, starting in September, I thought, well, this is a really great chance for me to ask my students, in particular my teens, what's their takeaway from years of music lessons? And I'd like to share with you the response of one of my students. He responded the first week with an audio he brought back. And it's always interesting to see how students bring back their reflections, because some of them bring a video with them talking. Nathan did this audio, which just me listening to it, and others bring essays written down on pieces of paper. Nathan brought back an audio the first week, and I was so impressed by what he had to say that I asked him if he would keep those ideas circulating so that we might revisit them the following week when I would have a video camera. And so here's what Nathan had to say in response to the question, what's your takeaway from 10 years of piano lessons?
Well, my takeaway from all these years of piano is that I believe that playing with emotions and piano is what I've learned to do, and that willingness to open up to myself and to the pieces that I've been playing, really it has helped me open up to others, both out of piano, in my social life. An example can be when I play the piano, I have to be honest in how I feel. I may feel upset, or I may feel happy, or I may feel distraught. But learning to use those emotions and focus them into my piece, I can also be honest of how I'm feeling about myself. If I'm feeling down or happy or ecstatic about a thing that happened, is been easier to open up to my peers, because before I started taking piano seriously, my experience with my social life is that I've always just been there in my friend groups. I never really opened up. I would never really give people my opinions or share to them how I really felt. I would always just be the quiet boy in the back, just agreeing to the conversation. But with piano and the willingness to open up, I felt that I've learned to see my own voice in my life, and I've learned to develop my voice.
So I have to admit, I was pretty impressed with what Nathan had to say. And what I've come to understand is that with music, education, and humanity as I keep saying, overarching umbrella, but for me, it's the foundation for teaching, that as a versatile teacher, I can help students acquire knowledge and skills. And it's interesting that knowledge and those skills can be musical knowledge and musical skills. But what I also see is that very quickly, it's not just musical knowledge and musical skills, it's also life knowledge and life skills. And that through this process of learning to play a musical instrument, that students gain an awareness and an understanding of who they are, and an awareness and an understanding of what the world is around them. And now that I'm in April of 2020 and I'm in a time of pandemic, for me, having an understanding of who you are, for students to have an understanding of who they are and what the world is around them, it seems to me it's probably a really important and really amazing thing that someone like Nathan has got things like that figured out because of the processes that he went through in learning to play a musical instrument. What I'd like to share with you to close this presentation off is something I wrote in October of 2019. Something that came about when I had a day completely to myself in New Zealand. A day to think, a day to reflect, and out of that came what I call a music teacher's testament. I am a music teacher, whether by intention, by accident, or by calling, honored to nurture musical journeys, privileged to walk alongside my students. My days are rich with meaning and value. I open doors, I show the way, I jostle, I step aside, I treasure when students take the reins. Smiles bind us to one another, conversations expand our mutual understanding, gestures tell stories of their own, dreams abound in the twinkle of an eye. Rhythms of certainty and uncertainty punctuate the path. Safety and security cushion the journey, while risk fills the space of predictability with fresh horizons. Willingness sparks the flame of exploration. Fear inflicts wounds on success and shame on failure. Surrender is not an option. Fear is my friend, the whistleblower. Music resonates with energies of the universe. We hold it in our hands and in our imaginations. It fuels our love for each other. It anchors homes and communities. My commitment is to serve all with grace and generosity. The enthusiastic, the dedicated, the busy, the stressed out, the troubled. No matter the twists and turns, celebrations and setbacks, I play my part for music and humanity. I affirm the wonder of who students are. I bring empathy, dignity, and gratitude to the work that needs to be done. This is my testament. Now, if you'd like your own copy of A Music Teacher's Testament, you can find it on my website, merlinthompson.com. I believe it's under my blog, and you'll also find a number of podcasts and resources on my website that I hope you'll take advantage of. My goal in this presentation has been to help you with getting a glimpse of the teacher you are. What I appreciate about occasions like the Australian National Suzuki Teachers Conference is the opportunity to think deeply about teaching, to ask ourselves questions like, what's meaningful in my teaching? What keeps me going? What do I want to do more of? And what do I want to do less of? Now, I've spoken with Tina O'Hagan, and she's offered to help me with my last task for you, because I've got some homework for you today. And what I'd like to do is to invite you to submit a sticky note, an idea, a quote, something that you would see comes directly from you as an idea to publish in the handbook, which will appear in the next edition of the Tempo magazine. You can send your idea or ideas to Tina and I'll put the address up here on the website, anytime before the end of April. I wish you great success with your handbook, and I can't wait to see what the results will look like. Thank you so much for being part of this event. I wish you all the best in your teaching, and until we meet again, until the next opportunity brings us together for sharing and informing, I'm Merlin Thompson, a versatile Suzuki teacher looking forward to the next. All the best, everyone. Bye for now.